and welcome to Rising. I'm Amber Duke and joined again this Friday for another edition of Rising Fridays with Jessica Burbank. Good morning, Jessica.
Good to be with you, Amber, in my Emily Gilmore jacket, if that means anything to anyone.
It does not, but we'll go with it. What's up first for us today?
Well, Amber, the United States began bombing Yemen last night in retaliation to Houthi rebel attacks on Western shipping in the Red Sea. Houthis, who back Hamas in its current war against Israel, said 5 of their fighters were killed in the strikes and vowed revenge. In a statement yesterday, President Biden said these targeted strikes are a clear message that the United States and our partners will not tolerate attacks on our personnel or allow hostile actors to imperil freedom of navigation in one of the world's most critical commercial routes.
Now, some members of Congress are already pushing back against the unauthorized bombing. Representative Cori Bush wrote on Twitter last night, "At POTUS can't launch airstrikes in Yemen without congressional approval. This is illegal and violates Article 1 of the Constitution. The people do not want more of our taxpayer dollars going to endless war and the killing of civilians. Stop the bombing and do better by us." Representative Ro Khanna also called Biden's bombing unconstitutional during a CNN appearance last night. Let's watch.
Well, Abby, what I've said is he should have come, as the Constitution requires, to Congress. And that was echoed in a bipartisan way by Senator Mike Lee, Representative Jonathan Jackson, and many other senators and congresspeople. The Constitution requires that if there is not an imminent threat of self-defense, that he has to come to Congress. And here we know by your own reporting that this has been going on since December. He's assembled an entire international coalition. He certainly should have come to Congress so that we can discuss whether this actually could put more American troops at risk. I'm concerned about retaliation in Iraq and whether it could draw us into a Middle East war. And I believe that he did not follow the Constitution.
So here we have several members of Congress, including some Republicans as well, calling this unconstitutional. I guess the debate is whether or not this would be considered an act of defense under the War Powers Act, which would not require notification or authorization of Congress. I actually think the Biden administration has a decent case here. In addition to the scores of missile attacks being launched by the Houthi rebels in the Red Sea, they've also attempted to board several vessels. That was actually one of the impetuses for the first strike that the U.S. carried out against the Houthis, was because they were attempting to basically behave as pirates and take over some of these vessels. So I don't know. What do you think, Jessica? Do you think that this is an act of defense?
I mean, if we're going to complain that this is unconstitutional, where was Congress for so many airstrikes that happened under the Obama administration, so many military operations that happened under Trump? Now, Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution says that Congress has the authority to declare war. Now, the War Powers Resolution clarified what the legal parameters are in 1973, but said the president has 48 hours to notify Congress of emergency military actions. And I think that it's time that, we really question the War Powers Resolution in its constitutionality in itself, but also is the president really acting in an emergency scenario? Is U.S. territory under attack? Are our armed forces under attack? Is U.S. shipments of weapons to Israel covered under the War Powers Resolution? I'm not sure that it is. I'm not a lawyer, but my basic sense of this situation is that, Hamas doesn't have a formal military. Palestinians don't have a formal military or a government to defend themselves with. And so you have many attacks of Israel on the Palestinians, and you have the Houthis supporting the Palestinians by attacking U.S. shipments of weapons. So those weapons can't be launched on the Palestinians. We already have the death toll, over 23,000 Palestinians just since October 7th. So we're in a situation where the United States wants to protect the weapons going to Israel, which is using them too, as the International Court of Justice is currently hearing a case on genocide. And so it's a situation that has the legal lines blurred and the moral lines blurred. And I think, Ro Khanna and Cori Bush standing up and saying, hey, this is unconstitutional, we should question this. It's about time we have the power to declare war and decide on military actions back to Congress if it's not an emergency situation, which to me, this seems like it's not.
I would disagree, just because when they are launching these missile strikes, they're not nonviolent missiles. They're not just a signal. They're actually trying to hit these ships. Luckily, the United States has the capacity, of course, to defend itself against these missiles. But they are threatening American lives. They're threatening the lives of the people who are on these ships, as well as other countries, by the way, who are in the Red Sea. And have also tried to board these vessels as well. So I don't think the United States is not acting in an emergency situation. It seems to me like this is a reasonable response, especially considering one of the core responsibilities of the United States military in shipping lanes is to protect freedom of trade and protect the free movement of vessels.
I will say, I don't know if there's such thing as a nonviolent missile, Amber. I don't know if those exist. But I do think what the rebels are trying to do is defend Palestine by attacking the ships that are carrying weapons going to Israel, which have been used indiscriminately, not just against Palestinians, but against regions that they believe are held by Hezbollah, by neighboring countries. Even on days when there's a ceasefire between Gaza and Israel, they have committed airstrikes in the region against Syria. And so it's really a regional conflict, and we have to understand it that way. And if the United States is going to be involved to the tune of billions of dollars of military aid to Israel, there needs to be some recognition of the risk of just that initial act of arming Israel with enough weapons to so quickly kill 23,000 Palestinians, dropping 2,000-ton bombs, the largest bombs dropped since the Vietnam War, the United States attacking Vietnam with bombs of that magnitude. And so it's a situation where I think this is an act of retaliation against the United States that should cause our leaders to reflect on their support of Israel and how that's upset the international community, how over 90% of the nations represented in the General Assembly have called for a ceasefire. I think the United States is making themselves a villain in the global stage by supporting Israel at this point. And that really comes with the risk of maybe if you're trying to get weapons to someone who's using them to bomb civilians, they might try and stop those weapons from getting there with violent missiles.
My point about the nonviolent missiles was sort of tongue-in-cheek, because I've seen some people talking on social media about the fact that the Houthis had not killed anyone, and so therefore basically we should not be too worried about the missile strikes. So that was kind of what I was getting at. Obviously, I don't actually think that there are violent versus nonviolent missiles, but I wanted to talk a little bit about this in the context of what's been going on with the Lloyd Austin scandal. Because we had the defense secretary missing in action for several days. The White House, the National Security Council were not notified that he was in the ICU. In fact, they didn't even know that he was diagnosed with prostate cancer and was undergoing treatment for that. And I think it speaks very, very poorly of the Biden administration and its credibility that as these attacks were going on in the Red Sea, as they were contemplating the idea of responding in kind with their own missile strikes, that the defense secretary was nowhere to be found, that they were not communicating with him. He wasn't involved apparently in any of these briefings or conversations during that 3 to 4 day time period. And I think that is such a huge abdication of leadership. It is a huge dereliction of duty. I think it's stunning that he still has a job at this point. Although I would question what exactly he's even doing in his role if, again, he wasn't involved in any of these conversations and the White House themselves didn't even notice that he was missing. And the media, somehow, the people who cover defense and national security, didn't notice he was missing. What do you think, Jessica? Do you think Lloyd Austin should resign for this entire debacle?
I don't think so. I mean, he's sick. I'm sure that there was a conversation within the department and the relevant parties about the chain of command and who was to be making decisions in his place. There are a lot of people making decisions for defense matters on behalf of the United States of America, the Secretary of State being a major one. You have the entire national security establishment. They have, people that step in when and if they are sick. So I'm not sure that having prostate cancer is something someone should resign over. And I'm not too worried, actually, about the decisions being made by the right people, the people that were appointed to do them. I may have questions about the decisions they're making. I think it's very escalatory to strike the Houthi rebels back for attacking these ships. I think that's going to escalate tensions in the region, especially because this is a group that is funded by Iran. And you had officials saying, let's strike Iran directly. Thankfully, that wasn't the decision that was made. But I'm not too worried about Lloyd Austin not being present while this decision was made. I'm not too worried about the media not being alerted right away. This is very personal, right? When someone's sick, that's a personal matter. And the public doesn't have to be alerted when the Secretary of Defense gets sick immediately when they get sick. I'm just really not concerned about it whatsoever. But I am concerned that we are airstriking a rebel group that's funded by Iran. This could make things extremely complicated in the region.
Do you think he should have told the White House and the National Security Council, though? Because his number two, the Assistant Defense Secretary, was on vacation in Puerto Rico when she was supposedly handling his duties.
I mean, when you have someone like going to the hospital because they have prostate cancer, we don't know what the circumstances was. It could have been an emergency. He could have been rushed in. There could have been no way they could have contacted someone. Who knows if he was even conscious or how dire the situation was. And so I'm really not concerned about it. There's all kinds of people that step in and make decisions when someone's absent in the White House. They have a lot of protocol for situations like this when someone can't be present for whatever reason,
but even the spokesman for the National Security Council, John Kirby, said that protocol wasn't followed in this case.
I mean, in emergency situations, I can understand protocol not being followed unless we know of someone deliberately not following protocol for malicious reasons. In that case, of course, something's wrong, worth investigating. But am I initially concerned that someone was hospitalized when they have a life-threatening condition? No, it's an emergency situation.
Right, but the concern is not that he was hospitalized, but that the White House and the NSC weren't notified in the middle of two wars going on, one in Israel and Palestine, one between Ukraine and Russia, as well as these attacks on the Red Sea. I mean, somebody, even if not Lloyd Austin himself, could have notified those individuals, not to mention the fact that they lied actually about why he was going into the hospital. First, they claimed it was for an elective surgery. They didn't disclose the prostate cancer to anyone in the White House, apparently, including Biden himself. He didn't know that his defense secretary was ill and could potentially become incapacitated and be unable to handle his duties. And then when he was first going into the hospital, it was for a procedure that ended up having complications. So there was plenty of time for notification before he ended up in the ICU.
Yeah, I'm not sure what's protected under, the confidentiality of this being a health problem. You don't have to disclose health conditions to your employer. I mean, if he's missing work over it, it makes sense that they would be aware. But I don't know. I feel weird saying someone's doing a bad job because they didn't immediately let their boss know that they're in the hospital and let them know when it became relevant to work, to them missing work. These are important people. But we have to hold them to a human standard, I really believe. Your health comes first. If you're not healthy and you're not able to do the basic functions of your job, if you can't even pick up the phone and let someone know that you're unhealthy, that's reasonable. If you're in the hospital,
he's had prostate cancer for a month and a half. He couldn't pick up the phone in a month and a half.
I mean, if you're dealing with it on your own time and you're not missing work for a health condition, you actually don't have a legal obligation to tell your employer in the United States of America. It's something that protects employees from being retaliated against and fired for health conditions, which has been a problem. And that, labor groups have fought so that there are rights in place to prevent workers from being fired just because, they're experiencing some health problems. It doesn't feel right to me to attack someone because they're not healthy. And so if something malicious was done intentionally, of course he should be held accountable, but it just doesn't seem like that kind of a situation here.
All right, we'll be back with more Rising after this.